Hello and welcome to this video series on structured query language, or SQL, or some people would say SQL. In this video, I would like to just talk about what is SQL. We'll talk about some of the different categories that some of these SQL commands fall within, and then we'll talk about a tool that we'll use to query or query SQL. So here's just some of the different categories: data definition language, DDL, data query language, data manipulation, data control, transaction control language. And on the next slide here, you'll see some of those commands that fall within those categories. Now, there's a little less than 100 commands in the whole entire language of SQL. But what you can do with the language is quite, I wouldn't say complicated, but you can have some really intense queries to discover certain information or retrieve certain information. So here's a working definition. SQL is a programming language that's designed for interacting with relational databases. And I would say the key word here is interacting with relational databases. There are databases that don't require, or you don't have to query with SQL. And the name for that would be NoSQL databases. Typically those databases deal with what we call big data. But for relational databases, you'll most likely use the SQL query language to retrieve and add, delete, and modify data in your database. Again, so these are just some of the categories that you can put some of those commands in. So like for the data definition language, you can do create, drop, alter, truncate, and then DML, be insert, update, delete, call, and so forth. Here's what I'd like for you to do. Pause this video, watch this 100-second video. I'm just going to do a brief introduction to querying in SQL, and then we'll pick up from here. Here's a basic cheat sheet. Now this one is not comprehensive as I would like it to be, but at least it gives us a few examples of how to structure out our queries. So once we've created our database, once we've created our tables, and then down below here you'll see some SQL code, the structure, and then it gives you an example for how to create a table. You have to use the create keyword, the table keyword, the name of the table, and then you specify the various columns along with the data type. But once you've created the database and created the table, you will then want to run a query that would retrieve information or update or delete information. And these are just some of the different commands you would use. Or you can insert information or insert data into the table. So here in this particular cheat sheet, it shows you the structure and it gives you an example. So this is assuming that we have a table called orders. And in this table here, what we want to retrieve is the first name, last name, order date, and we want to retrieve only the information where the order date is greater than 10/10/2010. So how do you do that? And let me go back up to the structure here. Use this keyword called select. You give the columns such as we did here, first name, last name, order date. If you put an asterisk here, that means retrieve all the columns, and we'll do some examples of these various queries. And then you have from. So from what table, and then where is the clause where you want to specify what particular data that you're looking for. And here to the right is an insert statement. And you have an update, delete, and there's so much you can do with the select statement or select command. And there's a good website that I'd like to point you in the direction to. It's called SQL, W3 Schools SQL. And then the one thing I like about this site is that it gives you quite a bit of examples of all the different commands you can use. So if we go to the where, you can look at a command that we just looked at here. So to give you the structure, and then it'll give you an actual example of how to use it. So one of the things I would encourage you to do is use this site along, or some other helpful cheat sheet along while you're querying your database. Here are some tools. So previously we talked about some ER modeling tools to draw or create our database. We can conceptualize it or create a logical model. But then to the right here is actual database interface tools or administration tools. The one that we'll take a look at is SQL Workbench. And this is where we'll create our database. And then we'll also query our database and run some various commands. You can also, with MySQL, you can also query via command line or do the same things you would do with a particular interface tool via CLI or command line interface. And so if we get time here, I'll take a look at that as well and show you how you would do both. One with the interface tool, and then here with the actual, and then another instance would be with a command line interface tool. And so when you download MySQL Server, it comes with MySQL command line client, and you have to enter your password, and then this is where you can actually run those commands. So again, we'll most likely just do a quick example of how to do it within CLI, but let's first take a look at how to create our database using MySQL Workbench. All right, so here's an activity that we're gonna basically use to create. We're gonna use these particular tables to create our database, and I'm gonna use MySQL Workbench to do this. So let's first just bring up MySQL Workbench. So let's do that. When you first open up MySQL Workbench, you have this interface, and then you have these three icons. You have the models icon. You have this MySQL connections icon. If you've installed this, you should have local instance MySQL 80. If not, you want to make sure that your installation is correctly set up, or you may want to create a MySQL connection. So in this case here, I already have a MySQL connection, so I'll click on this here. And you'll see that I have some tables or some database tables already created on my behalf. I have one called MyDB. Probably choose a better name for that. One is the classic database that comes along with MySQL Workbench as a practice database. It's this one here, the SQL. And then I have a students, and then I have a world database. So these are all my different databases. So in total, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, and then there's systems that keeps track of the system information. But what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go back to the models, and I just want to show you how you would create the ERD diagram. And the ERD diagram would help you with creating the actual SQL commands you would need to create the database or to create the tables. And so when we return in the next video, we'll start here and looking at how to create a model of these two tables here. And first we'll create the database, and then we'll create a model that will represent these two tables. So stay tuned.